What I'm about to tell you guys might be a little shocking. Here at the Conure Report, we like to dispense hard truths like Pez, and this is one of the most difficult ones I've ever had to grapple with, so I'm just gonna say it. Socialism ruined Honduras. Now, I know a lot of you in chat are going to re at me for this, but hear me out. Before a new president was elected in 2005, Honduras' unemployment rate was at all-time lows, and the poverty rate was being whittled away. All that changed, however, once the new president started instituting a bunch of so-called progressive, more like socialist reforms, and the country has been on a downward spiral ever since. In 2016, the poverty rate was at 60.9% and underemployment was at 63.1%. This is in no doubt because of the socialist shackles this new president put on the country that restrained the free market forces we all know lead to actual economic growth and stability, right? I mean, socialism has only ever led to bad outcomes, I think. At least that's what the totally unbiased news media has been telling me. Actually, let me check my notes again, one sec. Oh, shit. I don't know how I messed this one up, guys. I mean, these scripts are pre-written. Anyway, I got that totally backward. The administration that took power in 2005 basically did the opposite of everything I just said. They reduced underemployment to 35.6% and unemployment to 3.0%, cut the poverty rate from 59.2% from 63.7%, all of this while also increasing the minimum wage by 80%, introducing free education for all children, providing direct state help to 200,000 families in extreme poverty. I could go on. The point is, all of these quote-unquote socialist policies were actually helping to lift the crushing imperialist capitalist boot off of the necks of the Honduran people. It's hard for me to believe that anybody in their right mind might want to get this guy out of power. I mean, if your interests really are helping a downtrodden country improve their living conditions so that they don't have to flee to the US, you do very well to make sure that more people like this guy keep getting elected and more policies like these keep getting passed. But I guess if you put geopolitical military influence ahead of the lives of millions of human beings, then it might be in your interest to get this guy out of there and take his coat while you're at it. You know, I'm at the point where I'm starting to believe the US might actually have specially trained dogs whose sole purpose in life has been made to sniff out any and all countries that seek to improve their conditions through communist policies. Anyway, despite all that good shit I was talking about a minute ago, in 2009, US-trained Honduran military units yoinked the president out of his bed and yeeted him off to Costa Rica, an unconstitutional and illegal act, where he later turned up on the tarmac of the San Jose airport in his fucking pajamas. Everything that led to this former president's ouster and exile could take hours to go through, but I'm going to try my best to summarize it in this segment. I've compiled what I believe to be a concise timeline of the events using various Wikipedia and news articles, specifically a 2016 Intercept article detailing newly uncovered information about the coup. Quick disclaimer, I've tried my best to stick to the facts, but it's entirely possible that I misinterpreted certain segments of the timeline. So if you're also read on the subject, feel free to comment down below to make me aware of any errors I may have made. For the sake of time, I haven't included literally every single piece of information about these events, because doing so would make this video at least 2 hours long by itself. I'm trying to be concise for your sake. Fair warning, if you don't have any snacks or water at this point, you're making a big mistake, because here we go. The United States Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM, is one of the 10 commands in the U.S. Department of Defense and also one of the roots of U.S. military intervention in Latin America. It's responsible for Central and South America, the Caribbean, their territorial waters, and for ensuring the defense of the Panama Canal. SOUTHCOM has been under scrutiny for a long time due to several human rights and rule of law controversies, notably their support for right-wing rebel group the Contras, who sought to overthrow the leftist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Which is nothing too surprising, just the usual American tradition of the U.S. military aligning with right-wing terrorists so long as it benefits U.S. economic or military interests. Anyway, our particular story begins with a man named Crescencio Arcos, who, at the height of the Cold War, served as a Foreign Service officer to Honduras. In the early 1980s, he was part of a team that helped ensure U.S. military access to Sotocano, a Honduran military airbase located just 50 miles outside of the capital city, Tegucigalpa. Also known as the Nicaraguan Contra's unsinkable aircraft carrier, Sotocano became all the more important once SOUTHCOM's mission moved from interfering with leftist governments to the war on drugs. Just kidding, it's still both. In the 1990s, SOUTHCOM's budget increased more than any other U.S. military regional command, and as other bases in the region closed, according to Arcos, Sotocano became, quote, the only game in town. All of this exposition will become important later on in the story. Next up, we have to fast forward a little over a decade to November 27th, 2005. This was a very pivotal moment in the timeline in which an event took place that may have changed the course of history for decades to come. A first-generation Honduran immigrant turned 10 years old. Perhaps less importantly, this day was also the 2005 Honduran general election where we first encounter, in a big way, the hero of our story. Defeating the military-aligned National Party candidate, Porfirio Lobo, by 3.5 points, in steps Jose Manuel Zelaya Rosales, or MEL for short, the center-right Liberal Party candidate. I think it's important that I let you guys know a crucial piece of information about this guy. Manuel Zelaya is a class traitor. I know they're coming, so get your V's out of the way. Mel is the eldest son of a wealthy businessman who was involved in his father's logging and timber businesses before getting into politics. He actually ran on a center-right conservative platform. By all accounts, you would expect a landowning capitalist to be very friendly to the wealthy and powerful of this small nation. After all, he probably could have put into place many policies that would have helped benefit the timber and logging industry, which would then help benefit his family's businesses. Now that I think about it, this kind of reminds me of another son of a wealthy businessman who also became the leader of a country, but I can't really put my finger on who that guy might be. Either way, and like the guy whose name escapes me, Zelaya was actually an effective president for the citizens of his country. His politics turned left of center, and he did exactly the opposite of what you might expect from someone of his background. During his administration's 3 years, he increased the minimum wage by 80%, reduced poverty by almost 10% in 2 years, introduced free education for all children, provided direct state help to 200,000 families in extreme poverty, supplied free electricity to the families most in need, lowered bank interest rates, subsidized small farmers, the list goes on. This guy was a material threat to the interests of the wealthy and powerful in this country, while at the same time being a saving grace for those who had been struggling under military-led governments for decades. It seems like improving the conditions of the people in your country through leftist policy is enough of a sin to get the military up your ass, but Zelaya took it a step further in 2008 and sought to incorporate Honduras into ALBA, an intergovernmental agency comprised of several Latin American and Caribbean countries. On its face, this move doesn't sound like that much of an affront to so-called American values, but to do so triggers a response from those commie-sniffing dogs I was talking about earlier. Joining ALBA aligns you with public enemy number one of the US and the hemisphere, known communist, postmodern neo-Marxist Hugo Chavez. Pretty sure that gets you to the top of the US's shit list real fucking quick. As if that wasn't enough, for a few years, Mel had been pushing the idea of using the Sotocano military airbase as a commercial airport instead of the notoriously dangerous Toncontín International Airport in Tegucigalpa. Due to the surrounding hills and short runway, landing some large planes here is incredibly difficult, and because of this, there had been calls for many years for his replacement. These calls came to a head on May 30th, 2008, when TACA Flight 390 landed at the airport, careened off the runway and into the streets, and crushed several cars on its way to finally crash into a nearby embankment. 65 passengers were injured and 5 people died. Among the deaths were President of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, Harry Browdigam, the wife of Brazil's ambassador to Honduras, Gianni Chantal Neal, and the plane's captain, Cesar Eduardo de Antonio Mena. Due to this horrific incident, Zelaya said that the new airport at Sotocano would be ready within 60 days. According to The Intercept, in response to Zelaya's plans, then U.S. Ambassador Charles Ford wrote that the U.S. would keep a low public profile while working to protect U.S. security interests at Sotocano. And that when Ford left the embassy, he took a job with Southcom. Funny how that works. So far, the Zelaya administration had improved the conditions of the people of Honduras through leftist policy, forged an alliance with late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, and planned to use one of the most important military bases in the region for commercial flights. Normally, just being a leftist is enough to rustle the nest of angry hornets that is the rich and powerful, but in this instance, it seems like this administration was actively throwing stones at it. The rock that finally knocked the nest down was thrown in November of 2008. Following many requests from Honduran groups for the convening of a constituent assembly, Mel issued a decree which would organize a poll. That poll was to see whether the electorate wanted a fourth ballot box installed at polling places for the upcoming general election. While the first 3 ballot boxes are for presidential, congressional, and mayoral elections, this proposed fourth ballot would be to poll voters whether they wanted to convene a national constituent assembly for the purpose of writing a new constitution. I keep repeating the word poll here because that's all that was proposed. A non-binding referendum looking for the insight of the people living in Honduras and their opinions on potentially, maybe perhaps, convening a constituent assembly in the future. Maybe. The following year, in March of 2009, things really started to heat up. I assume because of negative feedback from elites who saw the people's representatives coming together to write a new constitution as a potential threat to their consolidation of power, Zelaya decided that it might be a good idea to make a poll about the poll, a preliminary poll, to ask voters whether they wanted the fourth ballot to be included in the upcoming general election. As you may have noticed, I'm being really flippant about this entire situation because, in my opinion, the outrage over asking the constituents of your country for their input on matters that directly affect their lives shouldn't necessarily be seen as controversial. It's entirely possible that the people wouldn't want to convene such an assembly and were fine with the Constitution remaining the way it was. However, the powerful in this country seemingly being afraid of any changes to this Constitution lead me personally to believe that there's something extra spicy in there that benefits those at the top, but that's just all my speculation. Either way, that same day, President of the Congress Roberto Micheletti observed that Article 374 of the Constitution states that no referendum can be used to alter the entrenched articles in the Constitution that are specified in Article 384. Problem is, Article 374 doesn't say that, and there is no Article 384 as the Constitution only has 378 numbered articles. So, either the BBC who reported on this, La Tribuna, which was the BBC source, or the President of the Congress were in error. As a side note, Article 373 states that the Constitution can be modified by a 2/3 majority of the National Congress, but Article 374 specifies that several articles are entrenched, meaning they cannot be modified. A short time later in May, President Zelaya issued an executive decree for the National Statistical Institute to hold the poll by June 28, 2009. Remember this date because it'll become real fucking important later on. The question to be asked was, do you agree that in the general elections of November 2009, there be included a fourth ballot in which the people decide whether to convoke a National Constituent Assembly? It's important to note that Honduran presidents are limited to a single 4-year term, and this question specifies that the non-binding referendum would be held at the same time that Zelaya's successor would be chosen. That means that even if Zelaya wanted the constitutional changes to benefit his presidency, he would already be out of office by the time any of this would take place. As a side note, I want to stress that point because it becomes really funny later on towards the end of our story. Unfortunately, this easily observed fact didn't stop many daily newspapers in Honduras from publishing claims that Mel wanted changes made so that he might be able to seek re-election, even though on multiple occasions he stated that he intended to step down at the end of his term in January 2010, though at this point, it seemed like there was no statement that he could make that would put all of the very angry hornets back into the nest that he'd been throwing rocks at. Speaking of angry hornets, what's up, Twitch chat? How y'all doing? I hope you found this section of the episode interesting. It's arguably one of the most important things I've dedicated my time to doing, and also, funnily enough, potentially one of the most boring in the context of the entire report. Even though U.S. imperialism is, one, very relevant given the current situation at the border, and two, very interesting when it comes to the U.S.'s relationship with socialism, I understand that a retelling of these events can be kind of unexciting. I hope you're all still with me. Gonna take a quick break to see what the fuck you nerds have to say about everything I've talked about thus far. The following events are when the countdown really begins. This is the dawn of the first day, 120 hours remain. On June 23rd, 2009, the Congress, who by this point had seemingly banded together against the president, passed a law that forbade the holding of polls, referenda, and plebiscites less than 180 days before the next general election. This was, very obviously, an attempted kick to the throat of the proposed opinion poll that was to be held 5 days later. However, the incredibly acrobatic president was able to dodge roll away from this strike by pointing out that because this bill was passed after the poll was scheduled, it would not be applicable in this particular circumstance, or so he thought. On what we'll call the dawn of the second day, head of the military command, General Romeo Vasquez Velasquez, was allegedly fired by the president for refusing to handle security for the June 28th poll. However, according to a CNN news article on June 27th, Zelaya on June 24th said that he would fire Vasquez, but that it was just a threat he hadn't carried out. Regardless, Vasquez was either fired or stepped down, and in solidarity, the defense minister, several heads of the Army, Navy, and Air Force resigned as well. It had been apparent for a while that the Honduran military wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the Zelaya administration, but from what I can tell, this was the event that they used as justification to solidify their opposition to him. 3 days before the poll, the president issued 2 new executive decrees, one annulling the May decree, and a new one calling for a public opinion survey on the convening of the Constituent Assembly, to be held on June 28th. That same day, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal declared this survey illegal, and working with prosecutors appointed by the Attorney General, ordered the confiscation of materials for the survey, which were then stored at the military base Hernana Costa Mejia. Shortly after, Mel led a peaceful protest with his supporters to the base where the impounded materials were kept, secured them, and moved them to the presidential palace to avoid their destruction. According to The Intercept, on this day, Honduran legislators were prepared to vote in favor of deposing Zelaya, a power they did not have, but U.S. Ambassador Hugo Lawrence intervened, warning that the U.S. would oppose to the unconstitutional action. The Honduran legislators pulled back and the coup was put on hold, for now. The next day, the Honduran Congress launched an investigation into whether President Zelaya had violated the Constitution and whether he was mentally incapable of holding office. In a letter to General Vasquez, President of the Congress Roberto Micheletti wrote, "Respectfully, I am writing you to greet you and remind you of the mission to be undertaken June 28th, that already the institution that you lead has called to defend our Constitution, and every one of those Hondurans thanks you. These people who say they are Hondurans and wish to change our Constitution don't deserve to be in our country, violating our Constitution and selling our country," seemingly implying that wanting to hold a popular opinion poll to consult the citizens of your country on whether or not they would like to see the 1982 Constitution rewritten is somehow selling your country. Or maybe simply asking the people if amendments should be made to the Constitution is treasonous. Either way, what we can assume that this mission Micheletti is talking about here is the events that would unfold on the poll's scheduled date. On top of this, apparently a top advisor to the Honduran military high command told The Intercept that on the evening of June 26th, a call was made to the U.S. Embassy in order to make it clear that Zelaya should withdraw the referendum, quote, or they would be forced to act. June 27, 2009, dawn of the final day, 24 hours remain. The following timeline, established through multiple interviews and an official record obtained through FOIA by independent researcher Jeremy Bigwood, details a party held at the U.S. Defense Attaché, Colonel Andrew Papp's house. Attending this party were American and Honduran military officers. Apparently at 9 p.m., the commander of the U.S. military group, which works directly with the CHDS, Colonel Kenneth Rodriguez, received an urgent call asking him to meet with the head of the Honduran military, General Romeo Vasquez Velasquez. Rodriguez agreed and advised Vasquez and other officers present to remain within the Constitution. At 10 p.m., Vasquez allegedly received a call asking him to come to the Honduran Supreme Court. Vasquez then invited Rodriguez, who declined and then returned to the party. According to The Intercept, Colonel Andrew Papp was told of the meeting, but according to email records Jeremy Bigwood obtained through FOIA, it wasn't reported to the U.S. ambassador for 12 days. Despite this, Papp and Rodriguez insist that the U.S. had no advanced knowledge of what was to take place the following morning. However, intelligence documents obtained by The Intercept show that as early as June 26th, Pentagon sources in Honduras believed it likely that Zelaya's proposed referendum would, quote, not happen, and that Zelaya could be forced to resign due to military opposition. The date is June 28th, 2009, the day the non-binding opinion poll was to be held. The following is a testimony given to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights from one of President Zelaya's daughters. She says, At 5 a.m., I was getting ready to leave for my home. My father was asleep. At 5:30 a.m., we started hearing the first shots. My father woke up and said, "They're deposing me." There had already been shooting in front of the residence. When they opened the door to my room with their weapons loaded, my security guard shouted, "Don't shoot." They didn't find me because I had hidden under the bed. They broke down all the doors to my house. According to the record, they took my father away at 6 a.m. Approximately 2,000 soldiers were involved in his abduction. They did not have a search warrant. It was illegal. Warrantless searches are only permissible when someone is caught in flagrant and only after 6 a.m., but my father was asleep. There was no district attorney. When my father tried to straighten things out, one of the presidential escorts told him, "Shut up, you're a nobody now." They took him away in his pajamas with his feet and hands bound. They boarded him on an aircraft with 3 heavily armed men wearing hoods. They abducted him without observing constitutional guarantees. There was never any trial. After abducting the president of Honduras without a warrant, without a trial, and without his consent, they brought him to the Sotocano military air base. According to The Intercept, some 600 American soldiers were stationed at the base, and they shared responsibility for the control tower with their Honduran counterparts. Zelaya was transferred to a bright blue presidential plane and then flown out of the country, where he would later turn up, dazed and in his pajamas, at the San Jose airport in Costa Rica. You'd think that 600 highly trained and very perceptive U.S. soldiers may have been able to spot the shady shit going on, where a group of Honduran soldiers were carrying a tied-up man into the presidential plane, but somehow, the U.S. maintains that it had no knowledge of the plane's passengers that morning. Enrique Reina, Zelaya's private secretary at the time, told The Intercept that he called the U.S. ambassador early the morning of the coup before Zelaya was taken into exile. Ambassador Lawrence told him that he would try to intervene and stop the plane from departing, but it left anyway. Reina remarked that, quote, "The Honduran military doesn't do anything without the U.S. approving it." Back in Honduras, the military had cut off power across the country, blocking media from reporting on the unfolding coup d'etat and making it difficult for people to organize protests in the streets. Luckily, that wasn't enough to stop protesters, as groups of people had been constructing barricades hindering access to the presidential palace. According to a New York Times article, several thousand protesters supporting Zelaya faced off against soldiers outside the palace, burning tires. 150 people that supported Zelaya gathered outside the Honduran National Congress, where they had been throwing stones at soldiers and shouting, "Traitors, traitors." The protests rapidly grew from hundreds to thousands in just one of several that erupted across the country. I am, and I assume many of you guys are, absolutely here for this kind of direct action. Within this Honduran National Congress meeting, the reason given for the arrest order were charges brought by the Attorney General. Apparently, their rationale was to enable a statement from Zelaya before the Supreme Court. However, the Honduran military had made the decision on its own to expatriate him, knowing full well that this was in violation of the Constitution. But I guess this was just a measured response to a decree ordering a poll of the Honduran people and their opinions on amending a constitution they are all subject to. Either way, the Honduran National Congress then agreed to accept a letter of resignation that Zelaya claimed he never wrote, disapproved of Zelaya's repeated violations of the Constitution, laws, and court orders, to remove Zelaya from office and to name the current president of Congress, Roberto Micheletti, interim president until January 27, 2010. After 12 p.m., a CHDS whistleblower, Martin Anderson, sent an email to the Obama administration's top defense official for the Western Hemisphere, Frank Mora. In this email, Anderson suggested that a brief be prepared of U.S. and particularly Department of Defense relationships with General Romeo Vasquez Velasquez and his closest aides. Anderson was very aware that the U.S. would be blamed for the coup by some in the hemisphere and was looking to get out in front of all that. Head of the military command, General Vasquez, the same guy that met with Rodriguez the night before the coup, and had received a letter from Roberto Micheletti regarding a mission to be undertaken June 28th against people who wish to change our constitution that don't deserve to be in our country, had completed courses in 1976 and 1984 at the School of the Americas. Located in Fort Benning, Georgia, this institution trained Latin American militaries and had been met with fierce criticism over its training of countless officers implicated in coups and human rights abuses in the region. Imagine my shock that this guy also helped carry out a coup in a Latin American country after being trained at this institution. The School of the Americas had such a bad reputation that in 2000 it was temporarily closed. However, the great George W. Bush reopened it in 2001, renaming it the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, or WINSEC. The Bush administration appointed Richard Downey and Kenneth LaPlante to run the newly dressed up institution, and these two were the same people running the CHDS at the time of the coup. I don't know if I necessarily need to spell out for you guys just how unfortunate these coincidences seem to be. Anyway, the response from the U.S. to the coup was mixed, to say the least. On June 29th, President Barack Obama had declared that the coup was not legal and that Zelaya remained the legitimate president of Honduras, saying, "It would be a terrible precedent if we start moving backwards into the era in which we are seeing military coups as a means of political transition rather than democratic elections." However, in contrast to this, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in her 2014 memoir, Hard Choices, wrote that the State Department, quote, "strategized on a plan to restore order in Honduras and ensure that free and fair elections could be held quickly and legitimately, which would render the question of Zelaya Zelaya moot. Holding out until the elections was exactly what the coup supporters wanted and what many politicians in the US were calling for. The Intercept reports that Southcom had assessed that the coup government could prevail in elections merely by holding out until ballots were cast. Quote, to defeat Zelaya, the de facto government needs only to endure until new elections occur. So on the one hand, you have the US president defending Zelaya and denouncing the coup, but on the other hand, you have the State Department seemingly negotiating in the interest of the people who violated the Constitution and deposed him. Funnily enough, that passage from Hard Choices was removed in the paperback version that was to be released only a year later. Some days later, Colonel Herbert Bernardo Inestroza of the Honduran Army told the Miami Herald that, quote, it would be difficult for us, with our training, to have a relationship with a leftist government. That's impossible. Colonel Kenneth Rodriguez, the one who met with the Honduran military the night before the coup, reported that, quote, most Hondurans I've talked to are confused by the U.S.'s reaction and feel somewhat abandoned by us. He told The Intercept that most Honduran officers knew that the U.S. didn't really like Zelaya, and they thought it would be seen as politically expedient to get a new guy that is favorable to the U.S. Coincidentally, the president elected the following year was exactly that. In August, Chief of the Honduran Army, General Miguel Angel Paget, and other top officials appeared on a popular Honduran TV program to defend the coup. He said that he had discussed the dangers of socialism in the region at CHDS in Washington, and that the military's actions should be praised as they prevented socialism from coming, quote, to the borders of the United States. This, along with Colonel Inestroza's previous statement, Honduras joining ALBA, and Zelaya's alliance with Venezuela's Hugo Chavez and Cuba's Fidel Castro, seem to all be proof of the fact that socialism did indeed ruin Honduras. However, countries are not ruined by socialism because of anything to do with actual socialist policy. Countries are ruined by socialism because it seems to invite the United States to overthrow democratically elected governments in favor of those friendly to the U.S. interests. To give you guys some insight on some of the bullshit that went on within the U.S. government after the coup, in July, U.S. Senator Jim DeMint, a Republican from South Carolina, put a hold on the confirmations of two top State Department officials, Arturo Valenzuela and Thomas Shannon. Valenzuela had been nominated to replace Shannon as the top official for the Western Hemisphere, and at his confirmation hearing, he called the situation in Honduras a classic military coup. Shannon, on the other hand, had been tapped to become the U.S.'s ambassador to Brazil. According to The Intercept, Crescencio Arcos said that due to this hold, Shannon was caught and that because Zelaya was perceived as a Chavez guy, working to restore him to office, as the administration claimed was his objective, would have been career suicide for him. This meant that if they wanted the holds on their confirmations lifted, they might have to comply with the wishes of those who were in favor of the de facto government remaining in power, regardless of their actual position on the issue. Apparently, this move was very popular in the days of the Cold War, when people in favor of foreign right-wing militaries in the Senate blocked nominations as a means of indirectly influencing U.S. foreign policy in their favor. It would only make sense that this kind of political strategy would be effective in both the Cold War and in relation to the coup in Honduras, as both involved an incredible amount of fear-mongering over leftist governments. Seems like socialism and communism really scare the shit out of capital owners and the military that by and large operates in their interest. Wonder why that is. Carrying on in early September, the U.S. State Department stated that it would not be able to support the outcome of the scheduled elections in Honduras that were to occur 2 months later. This announcement, however, seemed to sidestep an August resolution of the Rio Group, which is comprised of every Latin American and Caribbean government, that called for Manuel Zelaya's restoration as a precondition for recognizing future elections. The U.S. even went so far as to block a similar resolution that was introduced in the Organization of American States. According to an email obtained by The Intercept about a week after the State Department's announcement, the U.S. Embassy's economic counselor wrote that the wording is deliberately vague and that it was meant to cut the legs out from under Venezuela and its allies who insisted upon Zelaya's return to the presidency. Thomas Shannon, whose nomination was still on hold due to Senator DeMint's meddling, then had a meeting with Roberto Micheletti in the middle of September and, according to a diplomatic cable released by WikiLeaks, told him that, quote, the U.S. wanted to find a way to support the Honduran election, but that a negotiated agreement was necessary. Multiple sources claim that Shannon was very clear that the U.S. would ensure Zelaya's restoration as part of any agreement. However, in a meeting with DeMint in October, he made a sudden turn and, according to DeMint's top foreign policy staffer Chris Socha, Shannon said very, very clearly that the U.S. would recognize the upcoming elections regardless of Zelaya's restoration. Even though Thomas Shannon had been fervent in his fight for Zelaya to be restored to his rightful position as president, it seemed like the hold on his nomination was starting to get to him. Turns out, putting someone's job and livelihood in jeopardy is a good way of making them work against their own interests. By the end of October, a deal was finally reached between those for and against the de facto government in Honduras, but apparently it contained a major loophole. The Honduran Congress, which played a major part in the feeding the fire that led to Zelaya's ouster, would vote on restoring him to office. In a massive surprise to absolutely fucking nobody, they voted against that. The final nail in the coffin came on November 3rd, 2009, where in a live TV interview, Shannon stated publicly that the U.S. would recognize the election regardless of Zelaya's status. Within a few days of Shannon making the statement, who would have guessed, Senator DeMint lifted the hold on his nomination as ambassador to Brazil. What was to happen the following month would solidify the coup and begin the unraveling of all of the good the leftist Zelaya administration had done for the people of Honduras. We'll get into that in a minute, but once again, it's time to consult the forever beautiful Conure CC Twitch chat. What it do? Hope you've been taking notes. After the break, I'll give you a brief summary of the event so far if you've just joined or gotten lost along the way. So, what's up? So, quick recap. President Jose Manuel Zelaya Rosales is elected in 2005, inherits 46.1% underemployment rate, cuts that by 10%. Inherits 63.7% poverty rate, cuts that by 4.5%. Increases the minimum wage by 80%. Introduces free education for all children, etc., etc. Looks to help the Honduran people further by planning to use the best runway in the country for commercial flights. Unfortunately, this is a virtual thumb in the eye of the US and Honduran military. Forms an alliance with socialist Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro to benefit the people of Honduras. Add an index finger to the other eye and a middle finger to the military. After receiving calls from Honduran groups to convene a constituent assembly to amend the current or write a new constitution, answers those calls and looks to do so, virtually spitting in the general direction of the powerful in the country. The final straw, basically just a mean look to the powerful this time, decides to put forward a non-binding opinion poll to get the input of its constituents on the matter. The day of the poll, gets unconstitutionally yeeted out of his own country in a classic military coup d'etat. Totally standard practice. Here we are where we left off in the story before the break on November 29th, 2009. Important side note, this is just 2 days after I turned 14. Also the day of the 2009 Honduran general election. There was a heated debate about the legitimacy of this election leading up to it, but that was largely squashed in part by US political influence, as we got into a little bit before. Regardless of the opinions of every Latin American and Caribbean government in the Rio group, just every country in the region that is impacted by this election, and their resolution detailing their collective refusal to recognize any future elections without Zelaya's restoration. Anyway, putting all of that aside, Zelaya's party is split by the coup, and military-aligned National Party candidate Porfirio Lobo, the same dude who Zelaya beat in 2005, ends up defeating Liberal Party candidate Elvin Santos 56-56 to 38.1, replacing interim President Roberto Micheletti and becoming the next president of Honduras. Coincidentally, the US ramped up their military assistance to Honduras just 6 months after the election, even though it took Lobo 20 months to secure his government's recognition in the hemisphere. Nearly a year later, the CHDS hosts a national security workshop in Honduras with the new leadership, and military relationships are reaffirmed. Now you might be asking yourself, how did the media respond to the new administration? Where was the media after the coup? I'll tell you. Dropping like fucking flies. According to a July 29, 2010 article by Human Rights Watch, threats and attacks against journalists and political opposition have fostered a climate of intimidation. Since President Lobo took office in January 27, 2010, quote, at least 8 journalists and 10 members of the National Popular Resistance Front, a political group that opposed the 2009 coup and advocated for the reinstatement of the ousted president, Manuel Zelaya, had been killed. This isn't really all that surprising, though, considering the military orchestrated the coup and the new administration was best buddies with them. Now, I'm not here to make any accusations against anyone in particular regarding these murders. It could have been any number of people with varying affiliations that perpetrated these crimes. I'm just saying I'm not all too shocked that there was a crackdown on journalism following a military coup d'etat. What I am shocked about, however, is that in this time period, according to Human Rights Watch, quote, there had not been a single conviction of those responsible for the abuses documented by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, Human Rights Watch, and other local and international human rights organizations. Truly not a good look for an administration who was seen as illegitimate by many in the hemisphere. Moving on, fast forward past the Lobo admin and into November 24th, 2013. Another National Party candidate wins in the general election. Juan Orlando Hernandez defeats newly founded Libre Party candidate and Zelaya's wife, Xiomara Castro. Hernandez, clearly locked into a bet with Lobo over who can be the bigger piece of shit, appointed Julian Pacheco Tinoco as his security minister. Just in case you had any doubt in your mind at all about the National Party's romantic relationship with the Honduran military, Tinoco was the first active member of the military to ever be appointed to this position. Hernandez keeps up with the National Party's consolidation of power, the militarization of the country, and continues the trend of largely ignoring human rights abuses, including the skyrocketing murder of activists. In December 2013, a vocal member of the anti-coup resistance movement and world-renowned environmentalist Berta Cáceres was interviewed by journalist Nina Lacani. In this, Cáceres remarks how she cannot freely walk on her own territory and is separated from her children because of the threats. She goes on to say, quote, the army has an assassination list of 18 wanted human rights fighters with my name at the top. When they want to kill me, they will do it. 3 years later, in March 2016, Berta Cáceres was shot dead in her home by armed intruders. U.S.-trained Honduran military units were implicated in her assassination, 2 of which had received military training at Fort Benning, Georgia, in the School of the Americas. Once again, jumping ahead on November 26, 2017, Libre Party candidate Salvador Nasrallah runs a very close race against National Party candidate Juan Orlando Hernandez. Wait a minute. I thought Honduran presidents were limited to a single 4-year term under the Constitution. If the justification for the 2009 coup was because a president allegedly wanted to run for re-election, how the fuck is Hernandez running for president again? Wouldn't this be very blatant and easily pointed out hypocrisy on the part of the political party that has, by and large, won the past 2 elections because of that coup? How absolutely fucking ironic is it that the the National Party, and the Supreme Court justices that they, for the most part, picked, have now decided that allowing presidents to run for re-election is totally okay. What's more, the final percentages for the election were Hernandez 42.95 to Nasrallah 41.42, a very close margin. So close, in fact, that the Organization of American States, which conducted independent monitoring of the elections, found widespread irregularities in the conduct of the voting. There was an eruption of protests across the country so fierce that the totally legitimate Hernandez administration had to issue a 10-day curfew to try to stamp him out. I don't know about you guys, but all this information really gets my noggin jogging. And real quickly, as the final cherry on top of the shit cake that is the 2009 coup and the events following, on January 20th, 2017, godfather and profiteer of the kids in camps and previous head of Southcom, John Kelly, is confirmed as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security in the Donald Trump administration. Kelly has been a vocal proponent of extending the U.S.'s global war on terrorism to Latin America, has said on live TV that it was a consideration of his to treat detainees at the southern border like absolute dog shit as a means of deterrence, and has referred to Hernandez as a great guy and a good friend. Really one of the most telling endorsements the Hernandez administration could ever get. For more on this rabid mouse-looking motherfucker, check out this excellent Some More News video that goes into greater detail about his misdoings. Link will be in the description down below. He looks like a goblin, absolutely true. Look at this motherfucker. Like, he literally looks like Mickey Mouse after like a 7-month-long coke bender. Like, it's it's just not good. By this point, I'm sure you guys are wondering how the people of Honduras are faring under the totally not illegitimate Lobo and Hernandez administrations. Somehow, some way, things aren't doing so hot. According to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, from 2006 to 2008, Honduras averaged 3.8% annual per capita GDP growth. However, from 2010 to 2017, the GDP has dropped to just 1.8%. In 2008, unemployment was a low 3.0%. Following the coup, however, it has steadily been increasing, reaching a massive high of 7.4% in 2016. The poverty rate was 59.2% in 2008, reached a high for the time period of 66.5% in 2012, and has at least settled closer to 2008 numbers in 2016 at 60.9%. Underemployment has gone up nearly 28 percentage points since 2008. According to the World Bank, in 2006, the rate of intentional homicides per 100,000 people was 41.345, and then doubled to 85.062 in 2011. Luckily, it has gone down since then, but it still remains high relative to the time period. MS-13 and Barrio 18 are some of the most powerful gangs in the country, control a lot of the territory, and are responsible for much of this violence. These guys also have a colorful past with the United States, but that's a tangent for another video. Really boggles the mind why anyone might want to flee this country with their children and come to the US. So, to tie this segment into the previous one, this is what happens when Latin Americans try to fix their countries. In the case of Honduras, they elected a reformer in Manuel Zelaya. He instituted many policies that increased his people's quality of life, developed alliances that were beneficial to his country, and those shared in the hemisphere, decided to spend more money on the public rather than the military, and then lo and behold, the United States realizes that the leftist policies that actually improve the lives of the people in these countries lead them, the US, to losing their geopolitical stranglehold on the region, and for that reason, they're out. But instead of pulling out of the region and leaving these countries the fuck alone, they decide to pull the democratically elected and popular leaders out of their beds and ship them off to other countries. After this, the military-aligned candidates end up winning controversial and tainted elections, or are straight up installed as dictators, and the countries, surprisingly to fucking nobody, end up doing worse than before. To reiterate, if you really think that Latin Americans immigrating to the US for whatever reason isn't necessarily a good thing, then you should denounce the actions the United States has taken to unravel these countries and put them in the bad situations that people flee from in the first place. If you want less people to immigrate to the US, then you should be in favor of leftist policy that actually improves the lives of these people so that they don't have to leave the countries they were born in. And if you don't care to acknowledge any of this and have some sort of view of the US as an absolute good with the best intentions, don't be surprised when more people turn up at our southern border, fleeing violence as a result. Since the coup, you may be wondering about the state of Honduras on a global scale, the conditions the Honduran people find themselves in as a result, how Mel is doing nowadays, etc. I think it would be much better for you guys if you heard it all from him, in his own words, in his own language. To end this segment, I'm going to show you guys an interview from the Gray Zone with President Zelaya, which took place on July 1st, 2019, 10 years after the coup. The interviewer, Anya Parampil, asks all of the questions in English, but President Zelaya answers them all in Spanish. For those of you only listening to the audio, I'll be restating his answers in English for you. We aren't going to watch the entire interview as I've clipped out some of the most important segments, but I'll leave a link to the full video in the description. In this interview, Mel talks about how the US has benefited from the coup, how the Honduran people are doing since then, the foundation and growth of his political party Libre, his relationship with late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, how he transitioned from being a landowning capitalist to a democratic socialist, among other things. Stick around because after this I'll be dunking on right-wing arguments regarding the Trump concentration camp subject. This entire segment may well have been a debunking of the foundational assumptions people who are against immigration have, but the next segment should be at least a little more exciting. So without further ado, I present to you President Manuel Zelaya, the last legitimate president of Honduras.
Thank you for your time, Mr. President. It's been 10 years since you were removed in a US-backed coup from your position as the democratically elected president of Honduras. What has the United States accomplished here since then? What has changed in your country?
Bueno, la ruptura de un pacto social que le denominamos nosotros Constitución de la República es la Constitución del Estado. Cuando se rompe el pacto social, por lógica viene lo que se conoce como la ley del más fuerte. Crímenes, asesinatos, tortura, siempre del lado ganador contra la oposición. Eso ha sido un sacrificio para el pueblo hondureño porque el lado que tomó el poder ha tenido el apoyo de Estados Unidos. Estados Unidos es el mayor beneficiado del golpe de Estado. Y hay un principio en derecho penal que dice que el beneficiado de un crimen es el principal sospechoso. ¿Cómo ha sido beneficiado? Bueno, Estados Unidos tiene un control casi absoluto sobre Honduras. Controla la justicia a través de la OEA. Controla la seguridad a través del Comando Sur. Controla la economía a través del Fondo Monetario Internacional, Banco Mundial y BID. Controla los principales medios de comunicación en Honduras. Tienen una gran ascendencia, influencia sobre la opinión de los principales medios. Financia infinidad de iglesias que reciben donaciones de ONGs norteamericanas y financian ONGs hondureñas. O sea, controlan la opinión pública, controlan poderes del Estado y de esa forma tienen una alta injerencia en las decisiones de los estados como Honduras, estados pobres, estados débiles, donde sus gobernantes, por conseguir protección, entregan todo a los norteamericanos.
So the question was, it's been 10 years since you were removed in a US-backed coup from your position as the democratically elected president of Honduras. What has the United States accomplished here since then? What has changed in your country? And President Zelaya says the rupture of a social contract, which we call the Constitution of the Republic in the Constitution of the State. When a social contract is broken, what logically comes next is the law of the stronger. Crimes, killings, torture, always the winning side against the opposition. That has been a sacrifice for the Honduran people because the side that took power had the support of the United States. The US is the major beneficiary of the coup, and there is a principle in penal law that says the beneficiary of a crime is the principal suspect. How has the US been the beneficiary? The US has almost complete control over Honduras, control over justice through the Organization of American States. It controls security through the US Southern Command. It controls the economy through the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and Inter-American Development Bank. It controls the main media networks in Honduras. It has a big influence over the opinion of the main media outlets. It funds many churches, which receive donations from North American NGOs, and it finances Honduran NGOs. That is, it controls public opinion. It controls the powers of the state. And in this way, it has a high interference in the decisions of states like Honduras, poor states, weak states, where their rulers, to receive protection, give up everything to the North Americans.
What has been the impact on the average Honduran throughout these years?
Subió la pobreza. Hay más pobres. Ya sobrepasa casi el 70% de la población en niveles de pobreza. Subió el crimen, subió el narcotráfico. Según un informe del Departamento de Estado, el tráfico de drogas por Honduras después del golpe se incrementó casi al doble. Y dice el informe que Honduras se convirtió en el paraíso del narcotráfico. Subió la deuda externa. Cuando me sacaron a balazos debíamos 3.000 millones. Hoy en 10 años debemos 14.000 millones, o sea, 4 veces más. Entonces, eso constituye en que el país está en serios problemas de falta de crecimiento económico, falta de inversión, violaciones a los derechos humanos. Y yo le pongo una sola prueba. Honduras es el país de las caravanas hacia los Estados Unidos, porque el golpe de Estado convierte a Honduras en un infierno.
So the question was, what has been the impact on the average Honduran throughout these years? President Zelaya says poverty increased. There are more poor people. The poverty level already surpasses almost 70% of the population. Crime increased. Drug trafficking increased. According to a report from the U.S. State Department, the drug trafficking in Honduras after the coup increased by almost double, and the report says that Honduras became the drug trafficking paradise. External debt increased. When they took me out at gunpoint, we owed $3 billion. Today, in 10 years, we owe $14 billion. That is 4 times more. So this means the country has serious problems with a lack of economic growth, a lack of investment, human rights violations. And I will present you with only one piece of proof. The migrant caravans heading to the US are from Honduras because the US-backed coup d'etat turned Honduras into hell.
Hondurans have also told me that a small group of families control much of the country in terms of industry and specifically the media. Can you talk about the media's role in the coup and in sustaining the dictatorship, which you described?
Así funciona el capitalismo, en Estados Unidos, en Francia, en cualquier lugar que usted quiera. El capitalismo solo se basa en un principio, acumulación de riqueza. Así funciona aquí y así funciona en el mundo. Una pequeña élite de transnacionales asociadas con compatriotas que les limpian la solapa, hacen negocios y de esos negocios surge la necesidad de montar seguridad para ellos. No aceptan competencia. Yo traje petróleo de Venezuela con Hugo Chávez y ellos consideraban que deberían de mantener sus acuerdos y no aceptaban a Venezuela. Y esos son uno de los motivos del golpe de Estado.
The question was, Hondurans have also told me that a small group of families control much of the country in terms of industry and specifically the media. Can you talk about the media's role in the coup and in sustaining the dictatorship as you described? President Zelaya says that is how capitalism works in the US, France, anywhere. Capitalism is based on just one principle, accumulation of wealth. That is how it functions here and in the rest of the world, a small elite of transnational corporations associated with people in the countries who clean up for them. They do business, and that business creates the need to set up security for themselves. They don't tolerate competition. I brought in oil from Venezuela with Hugo Chavez, and they insisted that they had to maintain their agreements, and they did not accept Venezuela, and that was one of the motives behind the coup.
And I believe the U.S. ambassador at the time, Charles Ford, told you, you're not allowed to do this, as though he had the right to do this as a foreign ambassador.
Bueno, es que Estados Unidos da consejos que si tú no los sigues, ellos actúan con represalia. Bueno, me lo dijo George W. Bush, presidente de Estados Unidos. Me lo dijo John Dimitri Negroponte. Me lo dijo el embajador Ford y otro funcionario. Si usted, así me dijo Bush con estas palabras, usted no puede tener relaciones con Hugo Chávez. John Dimitri Negroponte, subsecretario de Estado, me dijo, si usted firma el ALBA, va a tener problema con Estados Unidos. Y yo firmé el ALBA. Y si me tocara firmar otra vez, vuelvo a firmar, porque Honduras, para salir adelante, necesitaba el apoyo de Brasil, el apoyo de Venezuela, el apoyo de Estados Unidos, el apoyo de Europa. No podemos depender solo de Estados Unidos, porque Estados Unidos tiene sus propios intereses. Es otra nación.
The question was, and I believe the U.S. ambassador at the time, Charles Ford, told you you're not allowed to do this as though he had the right to do this as a foreign ambassador. President Zelaya says the U.S. gives advice that if you don't follow, they act with reprisals. U.S. President George W. Bush told it to me, Jean Negroponte told it to me, Ambassador Ford told it to me, and other government officials. Bush said it to me in these words: you cannot have relations with Hugo Chavez. Jean Negroponte, his Deputy Secretary of State, told me, if you sign the ALBA, you are going to have problems with the U.S. And I signed the ALBA, and I would sign it again if I had the chance, because it is to help Honduras' progress. I needed the support from Brazil, the support from Venezuela, the support from U.S., the support from Europe. We are not able to depend solely on the U.S. because the U.S. has its own interests. It's another nation.
Can you compare your party Libre to the Sandinista movement and what lessons you took from them?
Es que son dos momentos históricos diferentes. El sandinismo surge de un sargento militar que se va a las montañas allá al principio del siglo XX y crea toda una fuerza antiimperialista que genera un partido que se llama Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional. Ese partido ganó una guerra, sacó la dinastía Somoza y lucha democráticamente ahora por sostenerse en el poder. Nosotros somos un partido que no hemos nacido de una guerrilla, no hemos nacido de una guerra, hemos nacido de un movimiento revolucionario, democrático, pero pacífico, contra el golpe de Estado y contra los que apoyan el golpe. Estados Unidos apoya el golpe.
The question was, can you compare your party Libre to the Sandinista movement and what lessons you took from them? President Zelaya says they are two different historical moments. Sandinismo was developed by a military sergeant who went to the mountains at the beginning of the 20th century, and he created an anti-imperialist force that created a party called the Sandinista Front for National Liberation. This party won a war, overthrew the Somoza dictatorship, and now organizes democratically to stay in power. We in Honduras' Libre Party are a party that did not come out of the armed struggle. We did not come out of a war, we were born out of a movement that is revolutionary and democratic, but peaceful, against the coup d'etat and against those who support the coup. The U.S. supported the coup.
And how were you influenced by other governments of the Pink Tide, specifically Hugo Chavez de Venezuela?
Bueno, habría que preguntarse cómo Hugo Chávez, militar, se convirtió en socialista. Si encuentras esa explicación, entonces vas a encontrar una explicación como tu servidor, ganadero, agricultor, terrateniente, de capitalista pasa a socialista. Son elevaciones del espíritu. Es la convicción del ser humano que el capitalismo, que es la barbarie, no es el futuro de la humanidad. Si fuera el capitalismo el futuro de la humanidad está destruida, está derrotada, va al fracaso, igual que el planeta. El futuro de la humanidad tiene que ser social, sencillo. No es el dinero, no es el comercio, no es simplemente las actividades económicas lo que deben regir a la humanidad. No, ellos deben de estar sujetos a lo social. Está bien que exista la empresa privada, la iniciativa privada. Está bien que existe el capital, pero no está bien que el capital dirija el mundo. No, es el mundo el que debe dirigir al capital, es al revés. Entonces, este es un mundo al revés. Y al llegar a la máxima magistratura de una nación, como llegué yo, de una pequeña nación como Honduras, entonces comprendí que no hay ninguna manera de entenderse con el capital, sino es sometiéndolo a la soberanía popular. El capital debe de existir, pero sometido a un plan de la soberanía popular que es el pueblo. La voz del pueblo es la voz de Dios, hay que tener fe.
The question was, and how were you influenced by other governments of the Pink Tide, specifically Hugo Chavez of Venezuela? President Zelaya says, well, you would have to ask how Chavez, a soldier, became a socialist. If you find this explanation, you will find an explanation for how I, a landowner, went from being a capitalist to a socialist. It is a heightening of the spirit. It is the conviction of a human being. Capitalism is so barbaric, it is not the future of humanity. If capitalism is the future of humanity, humanity is destroyed. If humanity is defeated, it is doomed to fail. The same for the planet. The future of humanity has to be social. It's simple. It's not money. It's not Congress. It's not simply economic activities that should lead humanity. No, those should be subject to the social. It's fine that private enterprise exists, private initiative. It's fine that capital exists. But it is not okay for capital to direct the world. No, it is the world that should direct capital. This is an upside-down world, and when you reach the highest governmental position in a country, which I reached, even in a small nation like Honduras, I learned that there is no way to deal with capital other than subjecting it to popular sovereignty. Capital should continue to exist, but subjected to a plan of popular sovereignty that is the people. The voice of the people is the voice of God. You have to have faith.
When you were facing the coup, Maduro was the foreign minister of Venezuela, and you worked very closely with him at that time. What did you think about him? What was your impression of Nicolás Maduro? And what do you think about what's happening now with Venezuela?
Dos aclaraciones. Una, Chávez no me buscó a mí. Jamás Chávez iba a buscar a un país de ultraderecha como es Honduras, gobernado por Estados Unidos casi en forma general y hoy más que nunca. Y un presidente que llegó con el centro derecha como suyo. Nunca Chávez nos iba a buscar, eso no tenga ni la menor idea. Yo busqué a Chávez. Eso hay que tenerlo claro. Nunca tuvo interés Chávez en Honduras. Eso es un invento de Otto Reis, Robert Carmona, de Roger Noriega, allá en los Estados Unidos. Tuve que rogarlo para que viniera aquí a tendernos una mano, con petróleo, con el ALBA, con Petrocaribe. Segundo, Nicolás Maduro sí es un socialista de nacimiento, es un obrero, es de la clase obrera, de la clase explotada por el capital, de la clase que vende su fuerza de trabajo y que le niegan la mayor parte de los derechos que tienen los capitalistas. Él es un socialista, igual que Chávez. Y además, toda la revolución bolivariana que inicia Chávez con sus convicciones socialistas, la hereda Nicolás. Y lo ha desempeñado con una gran capacidad, sensibilidad y conciencia. Nicolás no lo quieren reconocer, pero es un líder latinoamericano de gran prestancia mundial.
So the question was, when you were facing the coup, Maduro was the foreign minister of Venezuela, and you worked very closely with him at that time. What did you think about him, and what was your impression of Nicolás Maduro, and what do you think about what's happening now with Venezuela? President Zelaya said two things. One, Chavez did not seek me out. Chavez was never going to look for a far-right country like Honduras, almost totally governed by the US and now more than ever. And me, a president who arrived with the center-right, Chavez would never have sought me out. I reached out to Chavez. I have to clarify that. Chavez never had an interest in Honduras. This is an invention of right-wing activists in the United States, like Otto Reich, Robert Carmona, and Roger Noriega. I had to convince Chavez to come here and help us with oil, with the ALBA alliance, with Petrocaribe. Two, Nicolás Maduro, yes, he is a socialist from birth. He is a worker from the working class, from the class that is exploited by capital, from the class that sells its labor force and that is denied the rights that capitalists enjoy. He is a socialist like Chavez, and moreover, the Bolivarian Revolution that was initiated by Chavez with his socialist convictions was inherited by Nicolás, and he has led with a great capacity, sensibility, and conscience. They don't want you to recognize it, but Nicolás is a Latin American leader of great international stature.
I would like to talk about your personal political development, because when you were elected, you were considered part of a more center-left party and movement, and now you are speaking about socialism. Why did you change, and how would you characterize yourself now?
Centro-derecha. Centro-derecha. Es una evolución porque la derecha está agotada. Se sostiene con armas, con golpes, con fraudes, con engaños. El futuro de la humanidad tiene que ser social. Usted es un ser social, usted. Aristóteles dice que nosotros somos seres racionales. El hombre es un animal racional, pero nosotros consideramos que el ser humano hoy es un ser totalmente social. El hombre y la mujer sin sociedad no puede vivir. Todo lo que pensamos, lo que percibimos de la realidad es en relación a nuestro entorno social. Entonces, ¿para dónde debe de caminar la humanidad? ¿Para el individualismo? ¿Para el egoísmo? ¿Para el interés particular o el interés social? El interés social. El futuro de la humanidad es socialista. Posiblemente luchemos 10.000 años o más, pero el futuro, si la humanidad no avanzara hacia lo social, viviríamos con la ley del más fuerte en las cavernas. El ser humano está avanzando y avanza hacia lo social. Claro, yo me crié en una filosofía política liberal, pero ahora evolucioné a una política primero liberal prosocialista y ahora socialista democrática.
The question was, I would like to talk about your personal political development because when you were elected, you were considered part of a more center-left party and movement, and now you are speaking about socialism. Why did you change, and how would you characterize yourself now? President Zelaya says, center-right, actually. It has been an evolution because the right wing is done for. It sustains itself with weapons, with coups, with fraud, with deceptions. The future of humanity has to be social. You are a social being, you. Aristotle says that we are rational beings. The human is a rational animal. But we think that the human being today is a totally social being. Without society, men and women can't survive. Everything that we think and perceive is related to our social environment. So where should humanity walk to? To individualism, to egoism, to individual interests or social interests. It's to social interests. The future of humanity is socialist. We might have to struggle for 10,000 years or more, but in the future, if humanity does not advance to be social, we would be living in caves according to the survival of the fittest. Human beings are advancing, progressing to become social. I was raised in a liberal political philosophy, but now I evolved to a new politics. First, liberal and pro-socialist, but now democratic socialist. I think the quote, "the future of humanity is socialist," is a good note to end on for this segment. Of course, I'm a peaceful reformist looking to move the US to democratic socialism, and that has colored much of my commentary in this segment. But regardless of your political identity or affiliation, you should be able to see that the US's involvement in Latin America has largely been driven by greed and the pursuit of geopolitical power. More often than not, when the US turns up in the southern hemisphere, the people who live in these countries end up doing a lot worse. Honduras is just one of several countries that have been damaged in this way. I've only decided to focus on it because it's the country my father was born in. Either way, given all of this information I've laid out in the video, I hope in an entertaining and educational fashion, I'd like to ask you all to join me in recognizing Jose Manuel Zelaya Rosales as the last legitimate president of Honduras. Thank you. Thanks so much for watching this segment from episode 1 of the Conure Report. This week's Conure call-out is Space Pirate 3. I appreciate the support. Hope you enjoy your tier 1 sub to my Twitch channel. If you'd like to be the next episode's Conure call-out, follow me on Twitter at ConureCC and retweet my video links when they go live. Don't forget to like this video. To the right of me is the link to subscribe to the channel and follow at ConureCC on everything. Love y'all very much.